Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Claire Crone, and I'm currently the chair of the Citizens Environmental Commission. And we're doing this presentation on actually celebrating butterflies. Butterflies are a good place to start, with the understanding that there's a whole broader picture out there of what we have to plant for and what we have to preserve. Currently, I am teaching at NIU. I teach a number of biology classes. I did teach environmental science at Kishwaukee College for a number of years. I have a passion for sustainability, for organic gardening, and for preservation and conservation of our world in its natural state. And so my work endeavors to lead it forward into a more natural state that we have left behind. And I will begin the presentation, followed by Nick Newman, another member of our commission, who is then going to explain how exactly to set up this native habitat that I'm going to unfold for you as being so good for our particular butterflies. And then I'll come back at the end to give a little more explanation about the kinds of purchases that you need to make so that you have the correct native plants for your pollinator garden. Okay, what I'm going to do now is share my screen and go into my PowerPoint. It takes a moment to come up. So we start with butterflies. Who does not love butterflies? They're beautiful. They are symbols of summer. They're delicate. They are amazing in their flight and in their ability to survive in all kinds of conditions. They make long migrations. They are overall amazing. There's many different kinds of butterflies around the world. I focused on a few in this picture, but I'm going to zero in with our interest tonight on one particular one, our monarch butterfly. Why exactly? We're certified. Dekalb is now part of Monarch City, USA. It recently became a member because another of our Environmental Commission members, Rachel Farrell, had petitioned the mayor to please join this extremely important group that thousands of other cities have joined. It has members nationwide and advocates for the creation of monarch butterfly habitat, focusing on encouraging the planting of milkweed, the only plant eaten by monarch caterpillars. So a little background first on monarch butterflies. Beauty on the wing. They are familiar to most of us until some recent years. In my background, having been on the earth quite a number of decades, butterflies, monarchs filled the skies as I was a child. I could go out and find these beautiful little chrysalises and watch them hatch across many of the different fields that surrounded my little town on the part of east side of Chicago. And I'm going to give you a few basic monarch facts. Generation number one. Most of these adult monarchs will only live for a few weeks. Their primary concern, find food, mates, and milkweed to lay their eggs on. Monarchs that hatch in late summer, however, undertake a spectacular fall migration and have a lifespan of up to 8 months. These are much longer lived due to the necessary journey they have to take. They have 2 destinations. Monarchs from Western North America are going to the California coast. Monarchs from the East and Midwest go to the mountains of Mexico. The distance traveled is about 3,000 miles in 2 months when you're talking about our Midwestern butterflies. The numbers, millions, that will settle in a few small patches of forest in Mexico, hanging from tree trunks and branches. Many may die from cold night temperatures. They're going down there because they can't survive the cold, but it can get colder at night. In the spring, the survivors, generation number 2, begin the trip back north. Generation 2 stops to mate, lay eggs on milkweed plants, and then die. They have finished their journey. The grandchildren eggs then hatch into caterpillars, feed on milkweed, and grow into adults. By midsummer, we have generation 3 that will reach the northern states and Canada. Now we have a wonderful map showing exactly this. And it's amazing because this came from the National Wildlife Federation, and it literally has an arrow pointing exactly where we live in Dekalb, indicating that migration north. And if you look at the legend, we traverse an area here, both green and yellow. Green indicates that spring breeding area that they're coming through, and yellow is their summer breeding area. So this is where we can expect them to settle, those that stay with us instead of proceeding north. However, our monarchs are now endangered. Recently, December of 2020, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service announced that the monarch butterfly meets the criteria for an endangered species. Less than 10% of former numbers remain. West of the Rocky Mountains, that percentage falls to less than 1%. In the upper Midwest, in our area, the population has declined over 80% in the last 20 years. In geological time, in time in general, that is a massive loss in an extremely short period of time. What happened? We're going to review some of these things. Here is what it should look like in masses of millions on the tree trunks in Mexico during our winter time. However, we have climate change, habitat loss, and pesticide usage that has reduced these numbers so severely. So let's look at some of these one by one. Climate change, monarchs winter in Mexico and California, specifically because they cannot survive the cold temperatures. In the past 20 years, a previously unheard of phenomenon occurred in central Mexico, and that was snow. And this happened 3 times in the recent past. And here, this tragic picture, which in general you take a quick look at it and you think, oh, these are leaves on the ground. No, these are dead butterflies in a snowfall in Mexico. This snowfall was documented on 3 separate occasions, 2002, 2012, and 2017. And so they weren't there to survive for the flight back, but that was only part of the story. Diminishing milkweed, and here we have a couple species we'll be talking about. Here is the common milkweed, actually a favorite milkweed of the monarchs, and then we also have butterfly weed up here. So the history, humans decided that milkweed is a weed and began removing it from our gardens, spraying it with chemicals, therefore destroying the monarch's most essential resource. Its caterpillars cannot eat anything else. Urban areas have sprawled miles out from city centers. Areas that were once fields filled with milkweed are now parking lots and malls. And I will add, of course, we're also talking about farm fields as well. And if there's enough planting, as well as spraying with pesticides, even the milkweed that would have lived on the outer edges and along roadsides will not survive. We have a solution. Plant milkweed. As it's the only food source of monarch caterpillars, we can do this much. We then have to create natural habitat with plenty of other flowering native plants as a food source for the adult monarchs. It's only the caterpillars that eat the leaves of the milkweed plant. It's the adults that have to go from flower to flower, sipping nectar like other insects. One more thing we want to look at first. What have pesticides done? How far-reaching has been their effect? There was a University of Nevada research team, and they took 200 milkweed samples from California. They found 64 different pesticides in 200 milkweed samples. They had no idea that there were so many that were being incorporated into the milkweed plants. 1/3 of these plants contain levels known to be lethal to monarchs. So not only have we reduced populations, but we now have a food source that will kill off the caterpillar. So let's see what we can do here. We're going to talk strictly about Northern Illinois. What do we plant here in Northern Illinois? And we can do this. First, you have Asclepias incarnata. I am going to be giving you genus and species. The genus will be the first Latin word, and the second will be the species. And then I'll give you the common name, swamp milkweed. And I'm going to show you 4. Asclepias syriaca, common milkweed. Here's a typical one that you're going to see. Next, we have Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed. Very much favored in the garden because it is so showy. And lastly, a 4th, Asclepias verticillata, whorled milkweed. I show you these 4 because it has been shown that having more than one species in your native habitat encourages and increases the amount of eggs that are laid. At times, many times over what would have been laid if you had only one species. Now, getting more information for yourselves, and I want to note now to tell you that this entire presentation is being recorded, and it will be posted on the City of Dekalb Facebook page. So anything that you wanted to refer back to, links that you want to catch later, you'll be able to go back and see them. Monarch joint venture, a very important partnership. Note that we have federal and state agencies, non-governmental organizations, businesses, and academic programs that are working together to protect this migration. This is known to be at a catastrophic state of loss at the moment. You go on to this website. Here's how you can find your milkweed seeds. Finding and selecting seeds and plants. You can buy them as either planting and growing directions, a milkweed and wildflower vendor map. And then I'm going to show you another seed source that I've learned to trust and I'm going to pass on to you. So I purchased these recently to make sure that I will have all 4 of these milkweed plants in my backyard. Prairie Moon Nursery, easily accessible online, has verified real native seeds. They have an incredible variety. You'll hear more about their incredible offerings when Nick teaches you about planting. Note that prairie seeds have different requirements than annuals. You can't just often stick them in the ground, water them, and a week later you see them. This particular one, for instance, milkweed seed requirements have to have what's called cold, moist stratification to start with. The natural method, you'd spread these seeds on a weed-free site In late fall, allow the seed to overwinter. However, if you're impatient and you want to make sure to monitor the sprouting, you've got an artificial method. Mix your seed with equal parts of moist sand and refrigerate for 30 days. And so I'm showing you here what I have done recently. You can see some of these milkweed seeds that have kind of escaped the sandy mixture here. These are currently in my refrigerator. 30 days later, I'm going to plant them in flats first instead of simply spread them outside. It's hard to make sure you have a totally weed-free area and that you're not pulling out young plants instead. So I'm going to nurture them along a little bit in an artificial setting. Now, if I'm getting you excited about preserving monarchs, which I hope I am, I want to give you a caution. Rearing monarchs at home can be fun with your children. Certainly something that I did with my own long time past up in Wisconsin, where we would see dozens of monarchs and be able to find branches like this dotted with the chrysalises because they were so abundant. And we'd bring them in and put them in a little box and cover it with netting, and we'd watch them hatch. And my children would take them on their fingertip and let them fly away. Beautiful experience. However, we have some people with very good intentions who are purchasing chrysalises from suppliers, and hundreds to thousands of butterflies are being released by home rearers with the idea, okay, we're losing these butterflies, we're going to increase the population. Well, it hasn't been shown that that's worked in the first place, but here's the serious risks. A mass release like that may result in higher densities than would naturally occur in a certain area, making them vulnerable to pathogens and parasites. Then infected butterflies could go on to infect the wild population. That's one issue. The other issue is that these inbred butterflies from suppliers lack genetic diversity and bypass natural selection. There are butterflies, caterpillars in the wild, that will be eaten by birds that will not survive and should not survive because they wouldn't be healthy enough. And natural selection would favor their demise while the healthier ones would survive. Therefore, not a good idea to rear monarchs at home. There's guidelines now, however, the guidelines do not prevent raising a few monarchs for educational purposes, for instance. Best practice, of course, plant milkweed and avoid using pesticides. That's how you'll increase the natural population. So now you're all ready. You can plant your milkweed. You can start welcoming monarchs back to Dekalb. This is what we are planning. Hopefully it'll be a program that the Environmental Commission will be able to put on in 2022. You're seeing some pictures here. This particular picture was from a massive festival that they had in Minneapolis. We're a little bit smaller. We're not going to be able to have something quite that large. But if we have to wear a mask because we can't seem to get past a pandemic mode, then we're still going to march forward with this. So watch for the date. We'll let you know when this is going to appear. But I would definitely be remiss as a commissioner with the Environmental Commission if I didn't tell you that this monarch loss is the tip of the iceberg. As this National Geographic cover story is showing you, we are going through an insect apocalypse. And this little line here, you'll miss them when they're gone, and I'll tell you why. It can be disastrous for our country, for the entire world. And you can say to yourself, oh, you know, do I really want to miss all those things that used to fly at me all the time when I tried to have a nice meal out on my patio? I hope you've noticed that you can drive a long way and you still don't have to clean your windshield anymore. Where are they? What happened? Well, here's a study in Krefeld, Germany. There's these nets and methods of catching insects, and they monitored how many insects were in the environment over a period of time. They did this experiment in August of 1994, and you see this beaker filled nearly to the top. In August of 2016, same experiment, this is all that was caught. They tested 63 other similar areas, and they showed a 76% drop in insect biomass between 1989 and 2016. This is a profound loss in this short period of time. And should we care? What does this have to do with us and our backyards? I'm giving a backyard habitat presentation, right? Well, I will tell you exactly what it has to do with us. So let's take a look at what we'll lose if we lose all these insects that many pollinate our food products. So let's look at our kebabs. How about kebabs without onions, peppers, and tomatoes? And blackberry pie will hold the berries because those require pollinators to have any. How about a PB&J without the jelly and peanut butter? Because you won't be able to pollinate the berries or the plants that make the peanuts. And it gets worse. Lemonade with no lemons. Watermelon won't exist. How about a Greek salad that has no tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, or olives? We seem to manage to get some cheese. Somehow we get our corn for our tortillas, but no guacamole and no salsa. All of those products require these pollinators, and they're disappearing. Lastly, fruit salad that only has banana and pineapple in it, and pasta salad with only pasta, no broccoli, olives, onions, peppers, or tomatoes. This is what it has to do with all of us. But now we can take our part in rectifying this. So now you've heard about what we need for our caterpillars. I'm showing you 3 different types of milkweed plants here, and here's these beautiful caterpillars that will turn into the monarchs. And now you'll need to know how to plant the rest of the native garden so that the adults will have food for their journey. So now I'm going to pass this on to Nick, who will let you know about his expertise in this issue and tell you how to do this planting.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Claire. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in. We really appreciate it. I have been a commissioner with the Environmental Commission, I believe officially since February. And I can tell you what, I'm pretty amazed at the amount that this commission does. It's pretty phenomenal. But as far as my background, I graduated from NIU in December of 2019 with a degree in environmental science and also nonprofit management. I interned for about a year at a local environmental restoration firm called NCAP Incorporated that helps to restore habitat, just like we've been talking about. And now I work at the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District, which is the wastewater authority here in Dekalb, and I am the management and environmental analyst. And in that capacity, well, I do a lot of different things here, but in that capacity relating to this, I manage the district's native habitats. We installed, at this point, we're at about 10 acres that are in development of being restored to prairie. I also oversee and help collaborate on sustainability measures here at the district, and I've been involved in a number of intergovernmental partnerships, especially with the Dekalb Park District, which I helped to start a partnership program called the 2020 Native Habitats Project, which between our treatment plant here and some areas of the park district, we're trying to restore about 20 acres of land to native habitat. But now I will move on to my presentation here. So, just going to start my slideshow. Okay, so before we can talk about, how to create a habitat that pollinators, butterflies, dragonflies, bees, all these things can thrive in, we need to understand what native plants are in the first place. And it's a little tricky because the definition has been changing, especially lately. So the original definition of native plant meant that it was a plant species living in an ecosystem when it was first documented by scientists. So, from the 1600s on, European expansion, as scientists on vessels and exploring would come across new endemic species, they would document this, and those would be considered native to that area. However, that's changed a little bit because, there's not really much of the earth left that has not been impacted by human beings in some way. And so the current definition incorporates that. And now it's plant species compatible in locations that are affected by human landscape modifications. Additionally, kind of tacking off of what Claire had mentioned about climate change, that's a big concern, for pollinators, all different kinds of pollinators. And so it also incorporates that there are plant species that can survive in locations that are affected by or are going to be affected by climate change. But remember, we're here to talk about butterflies. So I'm going to talk to you about one of my loves, which is prairies, which is the home of butterflies. So Illinois is called the Prairie State, and that's because at a time, it once consisted entirely of tall grass prairie, oak woodlands, also called savannas, and wetlands. Especially in this northern area, we had wetlands everywhere. That's why there's so many drain tiles in our farm fields. However, these habitats supported many types of wildlife and ecosystem interactions, essentially creating a biological community out in the environment. And this, of course, includes pollinators, but it also includes things like migratory birds, other insects, smaller mammals like foxes, voles, squirrels, and also things like coyotes and deer. And unfortunately, as Claire mentioned, the landscape has been mostly replaced by agriculture in this modern day. And the issue with that especially is, aside from the pesticide use, they're monocrops, which means that it's just one of the exact same type of plant planted over and over for miles. In our case around here, it's generally called number 2 yellow dent corn, which is the type of corn we use to feed livestock, and that's what grows around here. Soybeans too, of course. And now, in the Prairie State, there's only a little over 1% of the original prairies that still remain. And so, unfortunately, much of that habitat, that all the wildlife in Illinois called home, no longer has a home to thrive in. So, aside from benefiting pollinators and making for a beautiful landscape, this picture here is actually taken last summer at one of the well-established sites at the treatment plant here. Prairies also provide, as I said, habitat, food, and shelter for wildlife. And it helps to create those ecological communities because there's a whole array of different animals that feed off of one another and interact with each other to form a healthy, biodiverse community. Additionally, it significantly reduces your lawn and grass maintenance and upkeep. You're not going to be out there mowing a prairie every week. You're not going to be fertilizing it. You're not going to be watering it or putting down herbicide or pesticides. And it reduces your time you have to spend out there. It reduces fossil fuel consumption because you're not buying gasoline to run equipment to take care of it. It helps greatly improve water retention and reduce runoff. And this is because of the fact that, well, plants in general will help to slow down water runoff, but especially prairie plants because they have very deep roots, and it helps water and other liquids to filter down into the soil before it can run across the top of the soil. It also helps conserve topsoil and improve soil structure. And topsoil is a really big concern here in Illinois because most of our farm fields are tilled twice a year, and all that soil is just left bare to the elements. So it either gets blown away by the wind or rain carries it away and puts it in our streams and then is carried out of state. Also, these deep roots help to improve soil biomass and actually make the soil more fertile. And it also helps to keep all that carbon below ground, which is another benefit for climate change. Finally, even though there is a fairly large amount of maintenance that might be needed depending on the size of a habitat you're trying to create, for those first few years, after it's been well established, like the one in this picture would be, it requires significantly less maintenance than even a regular lawn would. So a closer look at those prairie roots I was talking about. You can see here on this graphic a side profile view of a variety of different prairie flowers and grasses. And you can note that actually the majority of the plant exists below ground. It's all in the roots. And I don't know if you can see here, but there's ticks on the side that show feet. And so some of these prairie plants can reach beyond 15 feet below the ground. And that helps anchor the soil, improves, like I said, water retention. And actually, if you look to the left here, right here, this little splotch, that's the turf grass that we plant on our lawns. And you can see that it's really only got about 4 inches of roots. So it requires a lot of input to keep it green and keep it healthy, and it doesn't really do much for us. It's got a few more examples of different prairie plants other than milkweed for us to look at. We have New England aster, purple coneflower, Maximilian sunflower, mountain mint, not to be mistaken for the kind you buy in the store. That stuff will just spread like wildfire. Yellow coneflower, foxglove beard tongue, Ohio spiderwort, which is a personal favorite of mine because it comes in early summer and it's just got this real unique purple color. Showy tick trefoil. And something important to note about these prairie plants is that unlike annuals, which, you plant a lot of annuals and they generally bloom around the same time and then they all stop blooming. These prairie plants, because Mother Nature knows best, they all bloom throughout the season at different times and for different lengths of time. So early in the season, you'll have foxglove and spiderwort blooming, and later on, you'll get things like the coneflowers and the milkweeds and the sunflowers, maybe some mountain mint. And then into the fall, you get things like the asters and the tick trefoil. So pretty much throughout the entire growing season from, let's say, May all the way through October, you've got something blooming in a prairie at any given time. So now that we've kind of got an understanding of the basics of what makes up a prairie and why they provide such a benefit, let's talk about starting our own, right? This is about what we can do to help. So first of all, I just want to make a point that a prairie does not have to be large to make a difference. Just the fact that you're providing habitat where pollinators, monarch butterflies, dragonflies can come and feed off of plants is an enormous, it makes a huge difference because all these lawns, there's no flowers for them to stop by, to, feed off of, to have shelter within. And they can be started pretty much anywhere, in a backyard, front yard, a garden patch, on a porch with a large container, really anywhere with some sunlight and access to soil. And as you can see here, this is just in somebody's backyard. They've got their back porch here, a little walking path, and boom, they put a prairie right there. And native plants can adapt to a wide variety of conditions. You'll hear things talking about soil like mesic or wet mesic or dry mesic. Basically, that's just talking about the amount of water that is generally present in soil and how quickly it drains. But a lot of native plants can survive in a wide array of soil conditions. They're very hardy. And starting your own prairie overall, as a very broad scope, it involves basically 3 things. Site preparation, So kind of defining where you want to put a native habitat, preparing the soil. So that might involve doing a soil sample test to see, how nutrient dense your soil is, if the pH is correct. You can buy soil test kits online, or a lot of local extension offices will offer testing if you send in soil. And then also, if you have any invasive species or weeds that are present, you generally want to try to remove those, which you can, apply herbicide just in that first period to burn off the vegetation, or you can smother it with tarp. Throughout the summer, it'll burn it off. Once your site has been prepared, you either seed it or plant it with seedlings. And so once you have the ability to have good soil contact by removing those weeds and exposing the soil, you can spread seeds out or put your native plants in. And then the management. And like I said, for the first few years, probably 3 years, there's a good amount of oversight that needs to be done to make sure that, weeds aren't just re-encroaching in your area. So a little guide on starting seeds. Claire mentioned, for instance, the cold, moist stratification. That's just one example of things that needs and requirements prairie plants might have. So for instance, one of them is heat exposure. If you want to do this naturally, you can just plant the seeds if you're in a very hot region, and over the summer, they will be activated and then germinate the next season. Or you can expose them to hot water and then let them dry, and they will be activated and be allowed to germinate there. Cold exposure, which is what Claire was talking about. You can either use the refrigerator method, or you can also just plant in the fall, and through the winter, the seeds will be activated by the cold. Surface sowing for very small seeds, you can literally just throw them right out as long as there's real good soil contact, then they will grow. Scarification, which essentially just means you're kind of roughing them up and getting the outer layer of the seed to be partially compromised. So you could use sandpaper, you could use the rough side of a sponge, delicately, but just kind of causing scratches on the seeds. And then cool soil, which is just planting in spring or fall. Certain soil temperature will allow the plants to germinate. Another thing to remember with native seeds and starting a native habitat, these plants are perennial. So they last year after year, and they also self-sow, which means that at the end of each season, they drop their own seeds. So you don't need to keep planting them and purchasing more season after season. As long as you keep the weeds out, they will essentially keep bringing themselves back. And just remember that you just kind of have to be patient. It can often take 3 or more years for a lot of the different plants to finally actually start growing. In the case of the prairies at the district here, I'm still finding some new plants that are just developing for the first time, and this is now the 4th growing season after we put down seed. So just be patient. Might not look very pretty that first year after planting, but it will get there. So just tips for seeding and upkeep. Always make sure you're getting your seeds from Midwestern seed distributors. That's because they're growing them in the region that they're adapted to. And so it just helps the seeds to be viable, and also makes sure that you're putting in the right types of genus and species. In addition to places like Prairie Moon, NIU usually twice a year also hosts a native plant sale. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Just a tip for kind of, breaking up grass if you don't want to use herbicide, or if you have an area that you think would be a good spot, you can use a soil rake, which is just a metal a rigid metal rake with hard teeth on it. You can use, kind of breaks up the grass clumps and allows the soil to be a little more exposed. Or you can use a chain harrow if you happen to have like a small vehicle. You can drag it. It's basically like a piece of chain link fence with hooks on it that tears up the soil a little bit. So for timing, as I kind of mentioned, there are certain times it's better or worse to install seeds. And in our region, most of the prairie plants require cold stratification. So you can plant them in fall or in very early spring, like early March, when there's still freezes happening. And if you plant between October and December, which is what we've done before, it makes good use of the natural freeze and thaw cycle in the soil, and it helps work some of the seeds into the soil deeper. Therefore, they won't be, carried away by rain or when snow melts, that kind of thing. Just remember, when you're managing a prairie and doing upkeep on it, you just want to avoid using pesticides if at all possible. You can be very effective with hand maintenance. My first 2 years working here, I have only used hand tools to weed in the 3 acres that we had so far, and it's been effective still. So Prairie Moon offers a lot of good resources to start your own native habitats. They have these great starter kits where you can buy a collection of plants that are adapted to certain conditions. So in this case, they have 3 here that are shown. There's the semi-shade woodland garden here. There's tall grass prairie and rain garden. And they're adapted to slightly different conditions. It says medium soil, medium to dry, moist soil. And it has a catalog of all the different plants that will be included. And it's great because they come in these little flats like the vegetables you'd get at Lowe's or Menards, and you just put them right in the soil in late spring. Great way to get a head start if you don't want to wait for the seeds to develop. Additionally, you can just buy individual plants and kind of make your own custom prairie and plant exactly what you want or need. And Prairie Moon has a pretty amazing array of different plants you can buy. I mean, this is a very small, snippet of the different things they have to offer. So kind of shifting gears here, if you don't want to plant in ground, or if you just don't have a lot of space, but you still want to install native habitat, you actually can create raised beds that support prairie flowers still. And it's useful for getting a lot out of a very small area. They can be made from many different materials. It's kind of dealer's choice. A lot of times you see this kind, which is just a regular wood raised bed, but they can be made from sheet metal, stone, concrete blocks, pavers, brick. There's a lot of options. You just want to make sure, for instance, if you're making them out of wood, you want to get, for instance, cedar 2x4s from your hardware store or 4x4s that are untreated. And that'll make sure that you're not accidentally poisoning your plants that you're putting in. So to get started making a raised bed for a prairie, you can do it with a few easy steps actually. First, you want to decide where you're going to place it. In this picture, I would only assume that they're kind of getting this area ready, they're just using this area to create the bed. You'd want to create a bed and install it in an area where there is soil available under the bed itself. Then choose the material you want and build the bed itself. Many beds are rectangular, they don't have to be, but often a 3x6 or a 4x8 foot bed is a pretty good average size. You want to purchase your seeds or seedlings or plugs, and they can be found online. You can search Prairie Moon specifically, or you can find other distributors as well, just typing in native seed mix and just kind of make sure that the distributor is located in the Midwest. Purchase and add your garden or raised bed soil, and you can often find soil that has nutrients or amendments pre-added, which helps a lot if the area that you live in doesn't have, a whole lot of great soil. And then you just spread your seed mix across the bed at the right time or plant your plugs and you're finished. And this also kind of shows something else that's good to know is that you can make the raised bed as tall as you want because no matter what, once the plants develop roots beyond the soil that you're installing, they'll then just hook right into the actual soil beneath the raised bed. So here are some examples of some established raised beds here. We have a really beautiful array of them here. There's 6 of them, and they're all pretty shallow, but they're doing great. There's a cobblestone raised bed here with grasses, and then we have another one down here that are slightly taller. They have a mix of grasses and flowers. So they look great, they can go just about anywhere. It's a great option. Other good reminders, just remember that if you're ever needing to have a question answered, you can find a full list of plants and their needs at this extension, the U of I extension. You can search it by just typing in U of I wildflowers or click the link. And just always make sure to check the extension to see if the plants and the seeds you're purchasing are actually native to Illinois. Also, most tools and materials for building raised beds or installing in-ground even can be found at a local hardware or garden store. And just whether you're doing it in-ground or in a bed, a pollinator garden of really any size makes a huge difference. And just remember, you should be proud of what you're doing because you're making a really vital contribution towards protecting these pollinators and providing the habitat that they so desperately need. And then just kind of a little, I guess, background on my experience, kind of showing you folks what it'll look like. This here is showing one area out of 3 acres that the Water Reclamation District originally started to return to native habitat back in 2017. So we started off by, this was just mowed lawn originally. It was a whole acre of mowed lawn. We applied herbicide to the turf grass a single time in October of 2017. Once the herbicide becomes inert, which is after 3 weeks, we then installed the native seed in the following November. And if you're ready for this, that's what it looks like 2 years later. So it's pretty unbelievable. I mean, this is not even fully established in this picture at least. And it's just looking pretty amazing. All sorts of different plants. And the sites were, I would say, very well established by the following year in summer 2020. At that point, they need a lot less maintenance and they can kind of be, left to their own devices. Another project, as I mentioned, I'm working on is with the Park District and the Water Reclamation District called the 2020 Native Habitats Project. And the project overall, about 20 acres between Hopkins Park, Rotary Park, and Sweet Park, and a couple areas of the Reclamation District that are being converted to prairie. This area here is at Hopkins Park along the north edge by the bike trail. The bridge across would be right over here. You can see this area was just totally taken over by reed canary grass, which is a really pervasive, invasive species. And so about 6.5 acres at Hopkins. This is what it looked like after we started to prepare the site for seed installation. You can see that this is not dormant from fall. This is still green. This is areas that were treated and have been ready and made the soil made exposed for the native seeds. So invasive species removal over the summer. Soil preparation, I used a chain harrow to break up grass clumps in October. Then in November, we planted the native seeds. And so that's just kind of an overview of how you can install a native habitat in your own backyard, front yard, balcony, and make a big difference just, with a few short years of patience and hard work. So that's it from me. And I'll bring it back to Claire.
Okay. Oops. Thank you very much, Nick. That was excellent. It gave us all the information that I hoped you would be able to present. I want to iterate what Nick said about going as large as you want, or if you only have a 4 by 4 foot space and you want to simply put that raised bed in, fill it with soil and put plants in, you are already making a huge contribution. And that's essential for you to realize. You can do much by doing a little. I'm going to have a few more slides here that I want to show you. Let me put you back in to my PowerPoint because I need to explain something about nativars. Okay. Native plants versus nativars. I have it in quotes. This is a pretty new word. It's just begun to be talked about because it can be confused with native plants themselves. And the properties may be very, very different. So can I give you some definitions to start with? Native plants, we already had our excellent explanation from Nick about how that has actually evolved since the time that native plants were first defined due to the modulation of the environment that humans have done and due to climate change. Cultivars. Formal definition, a variety of a plant that was produced from a natural species originally and is maintained by cultivation. We'll often call these hybrids. They have taken original plants and enhanced certain qualities, sometimes color, sometimes size of petals, length of blooming. That's the cultivar that you will run over to Lowe's, for instance, and always find the same kind that is maintained. Now, nativar, that's a variety selected from a native species for specific qualities and offered as a cultivar. Simply, it means it's a cultivated variety on the market. Now, mind you, this almost seems the same as cultivar. However, they are often marketed as the natives. So here's a consideration. It may state it is a native plant, but it may or may not have as much value in supporting the growth and development of native insect populations. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. So you have to be cautious of these. Native plants, those that have grown up with the land, have adapted naturally to attract particular pollinators and to offer them a food source in exchange for their propagation services. So it's a symbiotic relationship between insects and plants. So let's look at Gaylardia. Here is the native Gaylardia. We have a monarch here. Here we have the adult that found a native plant for its nectar. I give you here the genus and species, Ardia Coachella. Note that this is also called Gaylardia. It's a cultivar. It ends up being an imitation of the original Gaylardia, bred for color and massive amounts of petals, what they call the double flowers. Some of these nativars, they'll still have pollen and nectar. Some of them don't even have seeds. That's been bred out of them in favor of making petals instead. Let's look at another example. Echinacea, your purple cone flowers that Nick was talking about, and penstemons. Mind you, you can have one species of a certain flower. Penstemon actually has 250 species that are all natives. You can have more than one species. But the leaves that are bred to be a darker purple or red have anthocyanins, which is a certain chemical that is going to bring that color out, that add a bitter taste. That may discourage insect foraging. Therefore, they are not as beneficial to an insect population that may avoid this kind of planting. Overall, many nativars are bred for decoration, not as food for wildlife or for genetic diversity. Another problem, because what they do is they make clones, identical copies of a particular showy flower that is really there for decoration. If your interest is in, number one, having milkweed to increase the population of monarchs, as well as recognize that we need to bring back our insect population and build it up, you will want to be careful not to get a nativar, but to get a true native plant. However, a study of nurseries in 4 states, this was up in around the eastern states, showed that 77% of the native plants available marked as natives were actually nativars with unknown benefits for pollinators. So bottom line, check your sources. Go to places like Prairie Moon and find out from other organizations, where are you going to get your true natives of Northern Illinois? So I want to talk about trees for a minute. When we're talking about backyard habitat, trees and shrubs fall into that. Some extremely important studies that I want to share with you. Native trees support birds far more than those that are the exotics. Exotics are simply those that have not originally been part of this land and have evolved with it. And they can be very beautiful, but they aren't going to have the same benefits. And this is a picture that was taken in the backyard of Doug Tallamy. He's a professor of entomology at the University of Delaware who's done some very strict studying on what's the difference between having a native tree and an exotic. So a mid-Atlantic study that was done, native woody plants support 13 times more caterpillar species than non-natives. And it turns out that just this particular bird here requires like 900 caterpillars to raise a brood per season. If you have a tree that doesn't support that particular caterpillar species, you cannot have these nesting birds. Native oaks are really more astonishing in the differences. A native oak will host 557 caterpillar species versus ginkgos native to China that support only 3 species. And when we talk about hosting caterpillar species, insect species, we're not talking about those that damage the tree. We're talking about those that live with the tree, those that are able to interact with the bark, with the leaves, that perform services for the tree, in some cases pollination. They are not damaging to the tree. They are part of the natural system. And let's look at berries. Looking at shrubs now. All berries are not created equal. Interestingly, birds will usually prefer and seek out native fruits when having the option. If you have an exotic bush there or a native one, birds are going to look out for the native ones. So let's see why. Berry components include fats, carbohydrates, and other nutrients. And in this particular case here, we've got a robin feasting on winter berries in New York, a part of the article that I've extracted this material from. In most cases, invasive fruits are nutrient poor in comparison to your native fruits that are, again, evolved on this continent. Birds must have adequate fat content for their long migrations, or they will not be able to survive the trip. Therefore, it's very important to have the correct berry producing shrubs. So I named a few here, your viburnums, 9-bark, spicebush. These are all readily available for planting. Again, you can order these from the good sources for trees and shrubs. And I also have this website that I put down here. This is a specific list for trees and shrubs native to our area, to northeastern Illinois. So you'll be able to find exactly, and it even tells you what benefits it has in terms of for bird population. So last but not least, I very much want to tell you about the potential hazards of exotic trees. It's not just that we may not feed birds, we may not host enough insects, but trees from other countries have often become invasive. Now we see a willow oak here. This is native to the eastern and central US, beneficial to the land, hosts a lot of insects. Note that every invasive tree that we have in the US currently was intentionally introduced as an ornamental, never suspecting that it could try to take over natural area. But there are a couple that have. And I want to give you one example, like the tree of heaven. The genus and species, Ailanthus altissima, pretty, brought in likely for its beauty. Its origin was China. It crowds out native tree species. It's also a fertile host plant for invasive spotted lanternfly, which is a threat to our grape industry. It also produces chemicals that prevent germination of native plants. So it clears the space around it so it can propagate only itself. It is so widespread now. And you see all these seed pods. In the lifetime of one of these, it can make millions of seeds. That there's an effort. It must be removed, or native forests will not reestablish. That's how much it has taken over. Another example here, the Norway Maple. Popular. You'll see it in yards all over. Here's our genus and species, Acer platanoides. The origin is Eastern and Central Europe. It also crowds out native tree species. It grows faster than native sugar maples, therefore crowding our native sugar maples out. It has denser foliage, so less diverse wildflowers can grow in the understory. And it's a fertile host plant for the invasive Asian longhorned beetle. So when you're thinking about what to do for your backyard, you do have wonderful options. You know what kind of milkweed to plant for the butterflies. You know how now to establish even a small area, if that's all you have the room for, so you can add some other flowering native plants for the adult butterflies. And when you're doing that, you're also welcoming insects, necessary insects that are going to be pollinators. And all of this is going to build on itself. So what you are doing is extremely important. So I want to thank you for helping the world, all of you that are going to go and take some of these ideas and put them in your backyard, widespread or in a little space, because it does matter what you do in your own backyard, because you're actually going to serve the entire world in this way. So also enjoy the beauty. And thank you very much for joining. And I want to point out that our CEC commissioner here, Rachel Farrell, who is the one who has established us now as a monarch city among thousands, she has also a great photographer. So thank you again, and you can ask questions in the chat box, or if you wish, you can voice them, and your audio, I believe, may be available to you, or Scott, our liaison, will put it on for you.
Great job, Claire. That's awesome.
Thank you. Any questions, anyone? Let me get back into here so I can't, there we go. Were we that thorough?
Perhaps so.
Well, I guess I should add that, again, that this will be available if you want to look at some of the websites that we listed and get any ideas that you've forgotten on the City of Dekalb Facebook page. I imagine that Scott will have that up pretty promptly.
So we have one question here, Claire, from Gillian King Cargyle. It says, does the City of Dekalb have laws against rewilding your front yard?
I believe that the front yard. At first, I was thinking you meant the parkway. Of course, you're not supposed to rewild your parkway. The front lawn is permitted as long as you have a 1 to 2 foot border that separates it from a sidewalk and a driveway. I would have to look that up specifically. I believe it may be a full 2 feet. Or we may have managed to get it down to just a foot, because we had a lot of discussion about that as we were changing this ordinance. But definitely you can put it in your front yard. The biggest issue is that you have to make sure to maintain it so that once a year you mow it down. that is, instead of doing a burn, prairie burns are necessary in order to sustain the growth properly by refueling the soil with proper minerals, etc. But you can't do that within the city and on your front or lawn or back lawn. So the alternate way of fortifying the land is to cut it down once a year. And of course, you do it at such a time when you're not destroying the beauty. So like early spring, you would mow it and it'll come back stronger than ever.
That's actually what we do at the district here, because we're very close to residences. So instead of burning our 3 acres so far that are already established, we mow them as close to the ground as we can, and then try to just chop up the material that's laid on the ground so it doesn't smother. Looks like we've got another person typing her question right now.
Okay. Let me add that ordinance requires a 3-foot area around such things as your meter box and your air conditioner and areas that have to be serviced by ComEd, for instance. You always have to leave walkways to those areas clear.
So Christina Kamka, or Kamka, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, is saying that I try to buy native plants and Hampshire Gardens brand since they are in Hampshire, so very local, and look for the butterfly symbol. Should I bump it up against the Prairie Moon native website selection?
I'd like to answer that because the big thing is, can you get it verified at your Hampshire source? Exactly what the genus and species are. Can they tell you where their supplier is? This is why I'm saying you really have to check carefully. If you go through some place like Prairie Moon, you'll get verifiable natives. That's why it may be a better bet. Because like I said, that study showed that 77% of the natives were not true natives, but nativars. Regarding NIU's native plant sales, I have not seen any information on one for this particular year. So since it's nearly May, I doubt if for whatever reason they're going to have one. I know that they're currently having one that involves vegetable plants for community gardens, but I don't think they're having a native plant sale.
Looks like Gillian is typing another question.
Note that NIU, by the way, because they're serious about their genus and species, if they do return, especially after the pandemic and everything's a little more back to normal, to having a native plant sale, you can rely on their plants.
Yeah, most definitely. I helped to man the booth for a couple of those native plant sales back in 2018, and yeah, they're definitely the correct genus and species. There we go. Let's see. So from Gillian King Cargyle, thanks. Does Dekalb have plans to add native plants to other public areas and roadways?
I think maybe you'd be able to answer that even better, Nick.
Well, I guess my answer to you would be, I sure hope so, and I'm fighting for it because since the district, the Water Reclamation District, restored those 3 acres and have now begun to restore more of our treatment plant property to Prairie, that's what got the Park District interested, because their board of trustees saw, oh, this is something that's viable, and it gets a really positive response from the community. So now we have the Park District restoring about 20 acres in Dekalb. And I've also heard from my supervisors that there are a variety of different schools also that want to start planting native habitats on their school property. So I think little by little, the tide is turning, and hopefully this will catch the attention of officials in the city government. And in addition to DeKalb becoming a monarch city, all this positive feedback and seeing all these examples, popping up all over the city will, hopefully shift the city in that direction. I can't say for sure because, who knows, but I think there's a good chance we're going to see a lot more native habitat around.
And we of the Environmental Commission can certainly recommend to the city. Our job, by the way, is to take concerns of the citizens about their environmental situation in all ways and make recommendations to the city council.
Yeah, if I could have it my way, all the roadsides, highways, roadsides, open fields that aren't used actively for recreation, waste of space. Let's turn them into prairie.
Anything else coming through, Nick?
Let's see. It looks like, here we go, from Christina again. So it says, can we transplant milkweed? There are tons that grow in horse pastures. Milkweed is toxic to horses, so I cut the ones down close to the grazing areas. Yeah. Transplanting adult milkweed may not be as easy as transplanting, for instance, if you have annual flowers or something like that. Their root structures are a little more complex. And oftentimes milkweed plants actually reproduce through what are called rhizomes, which is when the roots spread horizontally under the soil, and then children of that single plant pop up and are connected to the mother plant. And so you likely could transplant juvenile milkweeds if you caught them when they're developing, but I'm not sure how easy it would be to transplant adults that you might find in your horse pasture.
Let me back that up by saying I have attempted to transplant adults and have not been successful. However, another member of our commission, Rachel, had a very small one that she did successfully move from her garden plot into her backyard. So yeah, I think it will probably, like you said, depend on size and whether you're getting deep enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a big phrase in the environmental world is it depends.
Yes.
Okay, and then we have one from Gillian that says, great, I work for NIU Outreach and I'd love to help spread the word about what you're doing. Who should I reach out to after the event?
I guess my question is to obtain what information? I mean, you certainly, like I said, can access this entire program on City of DeKalb Facebook. To spread the word, I was going to say we used to do things like, well, I could do another presentation, but now the presentation has been done and it's easily already recorded. So would the issue be maybe, oh, you know what? I think it might be put on YouTube. Yes, as a matter of fact, it is going on YouTube, which means it'll be accessible easily. So therefore, if you want to spread the word by using the YouTube video of it, be my guest. As far as how else to get to us, what happens is the commissions don't have their own email address, for instance. I believe if you would send an email to Scott Zak, Z-A-K, he is our liaison. You can find his information on the city website. Anything that pertains to something you want from the commission, email him and he will get it to the rest of us.
Okay. Looks like Scott is currently typing. Yep, there's his email address in the chat, so anyone interested can reach him there. Looks like Gillian is typing again. Yeah, really good questions so far.
Hi, this is Jillian. I'll just take myself off mute for a minute.
Sorry.
Good.
That's okay. Yeah, we run the STEM Fest program at NIU and a lot of other programs that do outreach to schools and to people in the area. So I think that we could definitely help spread the word about Dekalb being a monarch city and get some of this other information to schools in ways that they could do it as kind of service learning projects with the kids. So I can, I'll reach out to Scott. Or Zach Scott.
It's Scott Zak.
Scott Zach.
Anyway,
okay.
Let me say I was literally just suggesting to the city manager that I would hope that we could pursue, when the children are back in school again prior to our Monarch Festival, perhaps, and you perhaps could be the promoter of this, having contests. Who can draw the most beautiful picture of a monarch on milkweed? And then whoever won, their particular picture would be made into a plaque and it could be put on the outside stating about being a monarch city and that the school supports monarch restoration, so that maybe there could be a little milkweed garden next to the schools. So this is how I think maybe you could help.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get in touch. This sounds great.
And also, just as a former ENVS student, I know that Melissa Lencheski, the director of the Environmental Studies Department, would probably be more than happy to spread this to her students as well.
Yeah, I've done programs with Melissa, so I can reach out to her. And I don't know if you know Melissa Burlingame, but
yep.
we work with her too. Great.
Yeah. Both those Melissas, they know what they're doing.
And I hope that we have had an impact and that it was informative to others who have simply checked in wanting to know how to do it. I know there's a lot of things that become big question marks and it seems difficult, if not impossible, until you learn the simple steps. And so that was one of our big purposes of presenting this.
Well, it looks like there are no more questions coming in at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope it was very beneficial to you. We will be having more programs. We try to have at least 3 a year from the Citizens Environmental Commission. I'm not certain when the next one will be coming up, possibly in June. So stay tuned, watch the newspaper and the city website, and I try to get these out to the radio stations too, and we'll keep you informed about what we're presenting. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thank you for doing this. I learned a lot.
Oh, wonderful.
We're glad.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Happy.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Scott, are you ending the recording? I guess, Scott, you're not here anymore. Okay.